Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Jamie Bolam podcast. My guest today is the wonderful Dr. Mohammad Farhadinia, who is a lecturer in conservation science at the University of Kent and a research fellow at the University of Oxford. Now, I was lucky enough to be taught by Mohammad last year when I was doing my master's at Oxford, and he was kind enough to be one of my supervisors for my master's project, researching cheetahs. So he's great. Awesome guy. Mohammad is an expert in large carnivores such as leopards and cheetahs, for example, those living in Iran, which is super cool. And his research now focuses on behavioral ecology and rewilding, including the reintroduction of top predators such as leopards, lynx, and birds of prey like the white-tailed eagle. Today, Mohammad and I discuss a bunch of interesting topics. How did he go from being a medical student to a nature conservationist? How do you capture a leopard in the name of science? And what should we all know about the world's rarest cat, which unfortunately now is the Asiatic cheetah? Mohammad and I also talk about conservation and mental health and how these can play into each other, why we should share experiences instead of achievements, what we should really care about in conservation, dealing with uncertainty and big egos in the sector, when you might want to consider doing a PhD, and we round off on the role of rewilding large carnivores, such as cheetahs, and why it's important. Now, Mohammad is a fount of knowledge, he's a lovely guy, and it was awesome to have him on the podcast to chat. I'm very excited for you all to meet him and get to know him more, and to hear from him. It's always a pleasure speaking with him. So yeah, with that, on with the show.
Thank
Okay,
you.
cool. We're recording now. Nice. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Jamie Bolam podcast. My guest today is the wonderful Dr. Mohammad Farhadinia. Mohammad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So my name is Mohammad, and I am a lecturer in conservation science at the University of Kent in the UK and a research fellow at Oxford University.
Nice, cool. And so what kind of things do you research, Mohammad?
So my PhD was on Persian leopard, which I use a combination of different tools like satellite telemetry, camera trap, genetic tools to understand the movement and population. And then during my postdoc, I was mostly focusing on the socio-economic aspect of conservation, mostly in Asian countries, to understand what is affecting the conservation performance in many of those countries. And since then, I have moved a bit back to what I started as my default, which is a combination of behavioral ecology and also a new theme which is quite popular nowadays, which is called rewilding. So I'm trying to use behavioral ecology to understand better how we can improve the rewilding in new environments.
Amazing, yeah. So you're focused especially on, is it large carnivores when it comes to your rewilding research?
That's the main passion, but we are working on raptors as well, ungulates as well, because obviously there are the whole bunch of species engaged in rewilding.
Absolutely nice. Cool. So you have a cool website. I've enjoyed reading it in the past couple of years. And in that you say on your website you're an ex-medical student, and obviously now you're a professor in conservation studying leopards and cheetahs and raptors. So how did you make that jump? How did you get to where you are?
Yeah. So when I wanted to choose where to go at the university, I was quite keen to do conservation and study environmental science. But we know that environmental science and conservation is not really financially reliable comparing to, let's say, top-rated majors like medical science. So at that time, I was high ranked at the country back in Iran to attend the university, so I could choose anything I want. So I chose to go to medical science just to learn much better the basic science, and then if still not keen on medical science, I could go back because you can go basically you can move from medical science to anywhere. And I did so. So I studied medical science for 3 years. That was quite cool. So I learned a lot how to comprehensively look at a system, which is called the body, because when you want to find what's the problem with the body in Stomberg, you need to look at the whole system, not just one specific location, which is quite applicable to what we do in conservation. So after 3 years, I decided that I want to work with wildlife, and then I choose to go back to environmental science, and now here I am.
Amazing, cool. So, what kind of research? You said you were doing things on Persian leopards, right? So, could you tell us a bit about the leopards in Iran and the research you were doing there?
Yeah, so for my PhD, I started to look at different locations which have been protected for a couple of decades to understand what is really about the number, because we really didn't know about the number of leopards, where they go, what is the interaction with people, even the leopard community between different sexes or ages. So I was quite keen to understand this aspect from the perspective of movement ecology. So I captured quite a few of the leopards, and then we monitored them for 3 years. So that took a lot of time to capture 6 leopards and monitor them. And as we were monitoring the leopards, we were doing camera trapping. And since then, the whole operation was turned into, because we had a film crew alongside our work. So the whole operation was turned into be a documentary series for 13 episodes, which is called Operation Leopard. And amazingly, it was aired on the national TV twice for the last year. And I think that was a great impact for local people, because I realized that many people were quite keen to see what we were doing in the area, and they were watching the documentary. So it felt like they were with us, and we were enjoying working together.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, how do you go about capturing a leopard? Because you said that very nonchalantly, but I'm sure it's a lot of work and it sounds very cool. So, how does that work?
So the main tool you have to capture a leopard is basically patience, because you are working with an animal which is much more smarter than you and has learned much better how to survive in difficult condition in mountainous landscape. So you need to be patient, you need to be resilient. So we use the snare traps, which is basically a cable, and when the animal put in the paw inside the cable, it triggers a spring and the trap, and the animal is stuck. And it's quite safe. It has been used in different countries for different species, and it's had the minimum level of risk for the animal. And then we go there, uh, we anesthetize the animal and then put the collar. But to capture 6 leopard, I think we spent about 90 nights in a tent. So in multiple, in different operation, which would about 3 months. So you need that. That's the reason I call the most important tool you have is not the technology, is the patience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure if Christian never listens to this, he's been on an episode a few weeks ago, or
Yeah.
last year rather. I'm sure he'd be very jealous to hear you capture 6 leopards in 90 days, because it sounds
Yeah.
very hard with clouded leopards as well. But
Yeah.
no, that's still a long time of waiting. And do you get any alerts when a leopard's being caught, or do you just kind of have to patrol every day? How does that work?
No, you need to wait inside the tent and then check the trap remotely, because each trap is equipped with a small transmitter which is sending a signal whenever it's activated. So basically, you don't need to disturb the traps regularly.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Nice. And so what kind of things when you so you're putting collars on the leopards, right, to look at their movement. So what kind of insights did you gain from that? And why is that kind of stuff important in conservation?
So the first thing which I remember, and I was really shocked, was that when I first went into the national park, I was thinking it's a national park, it's an island of mountain surrounded by too many villages. And I was thinking, and the first night I was sitting on top of a hill, just looking around, and so the national park was totally dark because there was no human living there, and surrounded by too many lights, and the farmers, community people, herders, just in different parts of around the national park. And I was thinking, wow, there's no way to have any future for these animals, because everything is encroached. All the people are just surrounding the national park, are just coming into the national park to exploit, for example, for the logs or to graze their animals. Obviously, some of them is illegal, but eventually there's no way for the animals to survive among all these humans. And then when we started coloring the animals, I was surprised to see about 1/5 of the animals' times is spent among people, not within the national park, just outside. They were just migrating, dispersing through people to somewhere else, to another country. And that gave me quite a bit of optimism, because that actually the science let me know that leopards can live among people. And in all those times, the leopards were just wandering among people outside the national park. Nobody saw them. So basically, they were hidden. They were living there. Okay. I mean, sometimes they committed some sort of conflict to kill a dog, but it was very limited. Most of the time, they were just patrolling, just moving, learning, exploring the landscape. And I was amazed how these animals are resilient. And then I realized, well, we have these mountainous landscapes, which are amazing. They are providing water. They are providing lots of ecosystem services for people. And at the same time, they are creating a heaven for these large carnivores. They work as an anchor for the population. They breed there, but they go out there. And many people, even they are not aware that the leopards are living among them, maybe 100 or 200 meters away, the leopard is just walking. Nobody knows. And that was great because since then I started to think, well, there are much more hope for conservation because still we don't need to really separate animals from humans. It would be great, but obviously we can't do that because of the growing population of humans and human needs. So we can live together, and the coexistence model should be working very well, which I saw it based on the data from the colors in Iran.
Yeah, that's awesome. It makes me remember, I'm being tested on my memory here. I don't know if it's Mumbai or Bangalore. I think Mumbai, where they have a leopards in a national park right next to the city. And those
Yeah,
leopards, I don't know how many there are. There's quite a few dozen, I think.
I
There
think
are
it's
some
about
amazing
30 to
photos.
40.
Yeah, and they also prey on, I mean, there are tons of street dogs, but those street dogs often give people rabies. And
Yeah,
I think somebody estimated how many lives were saved per year because the leopards are eating the rabid dogs. It was really
yeah,
interesting. At the same time, to know that there might be a leopard 100 meters away, like it's obviously quite uncomfortable. But if they're not going to bother you, then this it's
yeah,
fine in the
yeah,
great scheme of
definitely.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah,
awesome. Yeah, and that's another thing I found interesting about Iran is historically there were so many large carnivores and amazing animals in that one area because you had leopards, historically, what lions and tigers as well, I think,
yeah.
wolves, bears, elephants, historically
Not the
in
elephants.
a
I
long,
mean,
long time.
that's
Yeah,
very, yeah. It's
yeah,
controversial to be
2,000 years ago.
in the very old time, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
large carnivores.
But yeah, and I think what's the current state of the leopards in Iran?
You know, what I can tell is that the leopards are not doing bad in many parts of Iran. And it's not only Iran, in many parts of the West Asian and Central Asian countries. In fact, even in Russia as well, for the Amur leopard. I think the leopards have learned how to live with people. They are quite resilient. And in many parts of the Asia, they are making a comeback, actually. So we know that in some places they are not doing great, like Pakistan or Southeast Asia, because they have lost many of their populations. But for the rest, imagine for example, for the Amur leopard, the population is almost now doubled comparing to 20 years ago. And
Yeah,
for the Persian leopard, we definitely showed that the population is not decreasing. So basically, it could be stable, or it could be even in some places increasing. We can see many places, especially in borderland between Iran and Iraq, between Turkey, in some Caucasian countries as well, that leopards are just showing up in places that nobody had seen them for decades. And that's great because it shows that the conservation is working in many of those countries, even though that we know that the situation is not great in many politically, many of the range countries.
absolutely. I think was it last year sometime a leopard was officially spotted in Turkey again for the first time in many years after technically being extinct.
So the leopard story in Turkey is quite controversial and at the same time amazing because it has been claimed that the leopard were there, and then people say no, it's not. The leopard's gone extinct. But yeah, it's quite a few years they are making a comeback. As far as I'm aware, no cub has been detected so far, but quite a few individuals in different places, which some of them are hundreds of kilometers away from each other. So they are showing up in places which seems to be absent.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I did check last night as well about Amur leopards because I remember when I was like 10 years old or I'd see my first Amur leopard at a zoo and I was like,
Yeah.
this is such a beautiful animal. Reading online, there was only like 35 left. And you're like, oh, that's such a low number. How can anything possibly recover from that? And yeah, like you said, it's well over doubled. I think according to WWF, I think it was over 100 potentially now, which is really, yeah, amazing. But it makes me think. So on the website, they said, "Oh, I'm a leopard, the world's rarest cat," and I was like, "Oh, maybe once," but right now it's definitely there's a different cat that unfortunately has that top spot. So I was wondering if you could tell us about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely the rarest cat on the planet is the Asiatic cheetah. And sadly, it's not more than 30, 35 left in the wild. There used to be in almost 15 countries in West and South Asia, and even some Central Asian countries. But since 1970s, almost nothing has been detected outside only one single country, which is now Iran. And now the population in Iran has been shrunk. It has been declined from almost 20 different sites to now almost 2 or 3 sites. And the population has gone down from, we are not really sure about how many they were, 170 or whatever, but definitely not more than 30, 35 now.
Yeah.
And that's quite a sad story.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, to start with, I think people are always shocked when I tell them that there used to be cheetahs all the way from South Africa through to India. I think people only imagine cheetahs to be living in the savannas of Africa. So people are shocked about that. And they're also shocked that there are still some left in Asia. You know, people talk a little bit about the cheetah reintroduction in India, in Kuno National Park, which is with cheetahs from Namibia and South Africa. And there are some scientists who have said, oh, we should use Asiatic cheetahs, but it's just not feasible. There wouldn't be enough cheetahs. You'd be taking that out of such an endangered population. But how did cheetahs get into such a dire state, like where they've ranged all the way into India, and all of a sudden they're only in 2 or 3 small populations in Iran? What happened?
So the cheetah is a very sad story, because if we exclude the cheetahs and probably 1 or 2 more species, most of the other species are not doing bad for the past couple of decades in Iran. I mean, when you compare it to 100 years ago, obviously they are doing much in worse condition. But it seems that the conservation is working in many of them, because in some places they are now making a comeback. The population is stable. I'm not talking about the cheetahs, for many other species. But if you go back to the cheetahs, with an animal which has received the highest level of social and political support, which is almost equal to the tigers in India, which is like an emblem for conservation in the country, or pandas in China, it's very sad that we are losing them. And I think that have too many lessons for conservation when you are dealing with such a fragile and a small population of a wide-ranging animal, which seems to be quite unknown in terms of ecology, because whatever we know about the ecology of the cheetah is mostly coming from East Africa. And in East Africa, it's quite different comparing to many other parts of Africa. The first thing is that you can't really see the cheetahs in many parts of Africa. I mean, that's one of the main differences. And in East Africa, it's much easier. I mean, they are not the easiest one, but you can at least you can see them. And for the first half of my career, I was working on the cheetahs without even being able to see a spot 1 in the wild. So basically, you are talking about an animal which is like a ghost. It's like a glimpse when you have a chance to have a snapshot of sighting in the wild. So it means that you need to use the technology, you need to use different tools, because otherwise you won't be able to understand what they are doing. So what I think one of the first experiences that we can tell about the Asiatic cheetahs is that we really assumed that conservation was working, because there were multiple international and national organizations engaged, and everyone was talking about the cheetahs. The cheetahs appeared on the jerseys of the football team in the World Cup 2006 in Germany, and then the follow. So it became like a national emblem, a national icon for everything. And the cheetahs were, and actually the football players attending the international, matches, they were called the Iranian Cheetahs. So basically, it received amazing social support. But I think that somehow fooled us, because we thought that, well, they are doing good because everyone is talking about them. Nobody's really killing them. But we were dealing with a small population. A small population could go through loads of stochasticities. And what stochasticity, I mean, anything random or unpredictable which could happen to a small population. And if you lose, for example, 1 or 2, it could be equal to 4% of the population, which means that you have lost a lot. You can't compensate. And I think when we started to realize that population is not doing well, it was already too late. So I think the most important thing is that monitoring for these populations is quite important, and that's an experience for conservation, that we should not leave the monitoring to the end. We need to start whatever we do in terms of conservation aligned, and then we need to enrich it and support it with monitoring, because anything could go wrong, and then you learn something is not doing great, which is already quite late, which was it happened to be for the cheetahs in Iran.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So one of the things that I imagine when people often call conservation a crisis discipline, and if you're working with such small numbers, time is of the essence. Anything could happen at any moment, like you say. So, you know, putting out a camera trap study can take a long time. You have to find people to process the data. You have to find them to analyze it. And I've heard the term before, studying a species to extinction. And obviously, like you say, monitoring is important because we need to know what's happening. But how do you think monitoring can be done in a timely way so that by the time you've got your results ready, things haven't changed drastically? How can we make it as real time as possible, do you think? Um,
So let me give you an example from medical science. So imagine you have someone which is, let's say it's cancer. So you need to start treatment, but at the same time, you can't just focus on treatment without doing sonography and an X-ray, because you need to monitor what's happening with the tumor, for example. And if you are doing, for example, 10 sessions of chemotherapy, which could be expensive, which could be very detrimental to the person's health and mental health as well, and then you need to do an evaluation. And if you don't do that, you could be fooled because the tumor could be back and basically the chemo is not working well. So at every stage, you really need to you merge the monitoring into the conservation. And I think that is not a right idea about saying that monitoring just studying. It's not really studying. It's like the X-ray or sonography. And basically, you are not really keen about publishing a paper out of monitoring. You just want to know, do you have enough cheetahs? And I think one of the big blows in the mind of conservationists in Iran was basically two photos. And I remember I was working at the government at that time. So there was a female cheetah which was photographed by camera traps, and there were two photos. But there was one issue with these two photos. They were 150 kilometers apart where these two photos were taken. Basically, when I showed it to the rangers, I had a difficult time to convince them that they are the same, because they didn't believe me that one cheetah could walk 150 kilometers from one reserve to the next one. Basically, rangers had this idea that we are protecting a population within the boundaries of our protected area. And if you go to another one, they are the other cheetahs. But the photos, and then the follow-up photos, they showed us that the cheetahs are walking up to 400 kilometers and 150 is just a tiny proportion. So in fact, we realized that it's not a big population, it's a small population, which is walking long distances, and everyone is seeing them think, well, we have cheetahs. Well, basically, we are counting the same cheetahs multiple times. And that was and basically it was when we realized this phenomenon was already a decade into conservation of cheetahs, and millions of dollars have been already spent.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, that's really impressive that they move that much, and yeah, it shows the importance of I guess it's good where a cheetah has the spots that are like a unique ID, right? You can tell which cheetah's which by the pattern of its spots. If you had an
Yeah,
unmarked animal, like a black bear that's just black and there's no identifying features, it'd be even harder to know if you're counting the same bear or not.
definitely, yes.
So I guess that's one good thing about having spots. Um, yeah, that's crazy. So you've been fortunate, or sorry, you've been nice enough to let me help on some Iranian cheetah research as well, with the Iranian Cheetah Society doing some population estimates with camera trap data.
Yeah,
And I was thinking, like you say, there's only a couple dozen of these cheetahs left, and it's stressful, knowing like, oh, like if I'm delayed in doing what I'd like to do and getting these numbers out, like, you know, it's such a small population. You don't want
yeah.
to be the one responsible for holding up some important stuff, and some important results that could do something. You don't want to be the one to be like thinking, oh, I've sunk the Iranian cheetah, I've sunk the Asiatic cheetah. So especially when you're working on these really endangered species, especially if there's so much attention and funding that's already gone into them as well, they're like a national emblem. That sounds very stressful. And I'm wondering, something I've heard you mention a couple times, I think on your LinkedIn posts and stuff as well, is about conservation and mental health and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves as well.
Yeah.
And this is such they call it a crisis discipline. There's modest pay. It can be quite uncertain, like you said. So I'm wondering how you navigate that, because it seems like the perfect storm for me, for people to be stressed out and getting very anxious or depressed, or otherwise just having a rough time mentally while in conservation. What do you think?
Yeah, as I said, I think that the mental health is the big issue for medical people engaging conservation. And obviously, the payment is not good. The security is not good. The stability of the life, which does not allow people to have been in reliable relationship, for example, or stay somewhere working in remote conditions. All of them are quite difficult. But I think there are quite a few things which is based on my experience that I can share with you. So one of them is, I think we as conservationists, we need to really avoid sharing the achievements, because there are not too many achievements in conservation, honestly. I mean, there are, but they are very unstable, they are very fragile. And I think if you say, well, I have published 10 papers, and I do want to just to say people, well, I'm a successful conservationist, I think that would come at the cost of other people who won't be able to do that. Because publishing a paper is not really about yourself. It's to be in good moment, in good group, and with a good amount of data and analytical tools and capacities to be able to do that. And obviously you should be passionate as well and capable as well, but there are many factors. So I think what is important for us as conservation is to share experiences, not achievement. So basically to share the journey, not the destination, because the destination is quite blurred, it's quite difficult to achieve, and sometimes you think you are there, but well, it's gone. The way that we thought for the cheetahs in Iran, we were thinking, well, we are doing great. And after we saw the photos and that, well, it's just tiny number. They're just walking around, just walking all around the desert in central country. So I think we need to share the journey. And by the journey, we need to tell each other, well, we are basically in the same boat. We just need to tell each other that we are suffering from the mental health. We are suffering from different issues with the family, with our partners, with the working condition. And I think that's one of the things we really need to avoid sharing the achievement. And I have started to do that, not to share, for example, the awards or even sometimes paper. I mean, paper should be shared in a way that you are sharing a story, not really that I am great. I think we really need to care about each other in this community. So that's one experience which I have learned, and I have tried to stick to that experience. The other one is we really need, when we share the experience, is that sometimes there are other privileges that come up. And I realized recently that I took my kids to a national park in Croatia, which is called Velebit National Park, and that is an amazing place. They have reintroduced, I mean, they have translocated some Eurasian lynx from the Carpathian in Romania to reinforce the existing population. There are birds, wolves, an amazing place. And when I was with my kids out there, I realized that I am quite happy with them just to patrol around, just to stray away, just to search and investigate anything, climb the mountain, climb the rocks, even if they are out of the sight of myself. And I realized that other parents are not behaving the same, because we basically trust the nature. We are not afraid of the nature. We don't think that if you touch a lizard, that would kill you. We don't think that if we touch a bear poop, a bear scat, that would be, it would get gut cancer, because we have done it for decades. And I think that is one of the privileges, that we can feel much better relaxed, much better happy in the nature with the family. So basically, conservation has not shaped me as an ecologist or as a carrier, in the form of a carrier, but it has shaped me as a parent, because I know how the nature is working. I mean, I'm supposed to know with some limited knowledge, and I think I can do it with my family. So that's one of the privileges which basically, when you share the experience with other people, these are the privileges which come up. If you talk about the achievement, you need to talk about how much money you are earning, how much where was the last car, what was the last car you bought. But when you share the journey, these are the privileges that come. Another one which I am quite excited about is, I had a chat with a friend a few years ago, and he is an amazing and successful businessman working in plenty of businesses, and he raised and he earned loads of money. I mean, I think the amount of money he earned in a year was more than what I earned in 10 years. So nothing with conservation. And we were more or less in the same age group, more or less about 40, 43, 4. And he was talking to me when we were riding to somewhere in Oxford together. And he told me, well, I think it's enough for me to raise and earn more money. I want to have an impact, because I have passed the age of 40 and I need to think about the impact, because anytime you could go. And I was thinking, I never thought about having an impact despite having the same age, because conservation is always about the impact. because I have been always thinking about having an impact for the past decade, since the age of 20, which I was engaged in conservation. So that is basically something you are not talking about, but that is part of your life for whenever from the time you start, because you are engaged in plenty of voluntary position. We are engaged in plenty of, just be kind with people, just to not to put garbage or just collect the garbage. That's not just a simple, or loads of conservation work which you are doing and you are not paid equal to what you should be paid. So I think these are the privileges which makes at least myself happy and hopeful and optimistic to carry on with conservation.
Yeah, very well said. I mean, I can see there's a timer now, so how about we swap onto a new call on the free Zoom, and then I'll share my thoughts as well. How's that?
Sure.
Okay, see you in a moment.
See you.
Okay, cool. We're back. Nice. So yeah, that was really interesting what you're saying, Mohammed. It was interesting what you said about achievements and how you think we should share our experiences in conservation rather than achievements. I think my, not a rebuttal, I'd say, because I agree with you, and also, like you say, whether you have a paper or not is a factor of, are you in a good research group at that specific moment? Do you have the funding? Do you have the data? You also have to pay to publish unless you have an agreement with your university. So what if you're not in a university? There's issues with the publishing industry from what I've heard in that, can you actually afford to share your paper? At the same time, at least if you're trying to be an academic, the paper is the kind of currency that's, revered and put highest up in academia, right? Like if you're applying to be a researcher or a postdoc or a lecturer, I saw you, my course director shared some positions at Kent University actually for conservation science, and they ask, to have a good, strong publication record. So do you think that people should value other things when it comes to looking to hire an academic? Obviously, a paper is how we transmit some of our findings. It's not the only way we can transmit our findings. It's how scientists read each other's work, but the average person would be much more likely to listen to a podcast or read an article online than to ever go on Google Scholar, right? So what do you think?
I think universities have started to realize that we need more than just a citation of the papers and the number of papers. Papers are great because that is a cohesive way in which you can show that you have a critical thinking about addressing one issue. So that's great. I think that's something we should be doing that. But that's my point. That should not be the only currency or one of the few currencies. And I think one of the main currencies is based on I can tell you one interesting story. So I recently received a message from the Google Scholar that my citation have gone above a number, which is great, obviously. But when I checked the papers, which were the most cited ones, I realized that one of the paper was actually cited only once or never, I don't know, maybe never, and it was published 6 years ago. So you expect a good paper to be cited about maybe around 8 times per year. And from the perspective of the academia, basically that paper was a failure because for 6 years, it didn't get any attention and maybe was cited once or twice or nothing. And that paper actually was probably the only paper, or not one of the few papers, which I'm really proud of, because that was about leopards which are killing each other. And before that one, we had no idea, at least in Iran, that the leopards are doing the same. And amazingly, we realized that the leopards are killing each other, but we presumed that it was between males which are killing younger males because they wanted to get rid of them because of the competition over females. And in that paper, we showed that it's mostly between females. Basically, young females are the target. And that came based from one of the leopards, which I colored, and that female leopard was killed by another leopard. So and then after 2 years, I was asked by the government in Iran that they have found a leopard which was not doing well in the same area, and they wanted to do what we have to do with the animal, to have to keep it in the zoo or give it another chance. And that very paper allowed us to find what we can do. And we eventually advocated for doing some rehabilitation in a zoo if the animal would be able to be recovered, and then how, when, where we have to release it back to the area in order not to be killed by other leopards, because that was in an area with high density of the leopards. The leopard was sighted 6 times after 6 times but since she was released back. And at that time I was, wow, this is the impact. I was quite keen from this paper, and that paper never cited, I mean, once or twice or never. And I think you can see the impact could be from something which is quite different from all these citations. So that's my concern. I think we need to diversify the way we are sharing both achievement and experiences, because if we just talk about one paper or the grant funding or whatever, that could represent too many things, but still you are missing too many other details. And I think this example would be one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'd agree. And yeah, that's obviously tremendously impactful. And having actual application to practice is what a good paper should be, or the research, in my opinion, not just research for research's sake. And it makes me think of one of the other ways of ranking a paper. There's the alt metrics, which is one attempt at increasing, the impact kind of measuring of a paper rather than just citations. But one of them, for example, is Twitter, mentions or retweets. And I'm like, all of your scientific buddies, we can all retweet each other's papers, but are you actually having any impact? Like, are you just preaching to the converted? Maybe not. So I think definitely focusing on real life impact is really good. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I also liked when you're talking about parenting, because like you say, you can let your children run around and pick up potential bear poo. I did that in the mountains in the Pyrenees a few years ago. I was on the hunt for some bear poo. I think I found some. Pretty confident. But yeah, how do you think? I guess you can tackle conservation parenting from two sides in my mind. There's the like you were saying, how you instill that love of nature and help your children care about nature. And then on the practical side, it's how you make that work as a parent. And for example, if you see, some of our colleagues, or I mean, we can do cool field work, right? Like I'm about to move to Taiwan. I'm going to be doing cool field work, more locally based to start with, but some of the colleagues are out in the mountains studying bears. Some of our colleagues, going to Zimbabwe for half the year, back home to Zimbabwe, studying lions, or out in the middle of the Amazon, doing all of this really cool research on jaguars or whatever else. But, like you say, also on a practical level, sometimes the pay is pretty poor in conservation. I know some of our colleagues who have had to delay until quite a late age having children, A, because they can't afford it, or if two of them, one of them, his wife's a postdoc as well, researcher, but she's in medical research, so she gets paid more. And he told me the other week, if we were both in conservation, I would have had to move out of conservation because there's no way we could afford to have our child. So there are practical trade-offs to be made, right? And also, if you're out in the middle of the Amazon for 6 months at a time or whatnot, how are you supposed to hold a relationship? Because I know plenty of accomplished single conservationists, and that's not a place I want to be. So I was wondering how, from a practical point of view as well, what the considerations, to do your conservation with our amazing impact, and it's such a meaningful career, like you say, but to not kind of sacrifice the rest of our lives, which is obviously important. Our families, our interests, our hobbies, just our children. What's your advice?
Well, I think it's not something I can give any advice, because it's really context dependent. It's dependent on your relationship, the people who you are in contact, the type of work you are doing, and the type of conservation you are doing. So there are plenty of factors which are engaged. And I think I was engaged in one of the difficult situation because I was working overseas and it was in difficult condition and all this. And so there were two countries engaged. So I think one of the things which I could share as an experience is to let the family know what you are doing, because we know that the family, the society does not do what we are doing. If we are, for example, I remember when I was a volunteer in environmental NGOs 30 years ago or 25 years ago, we were thought that, I mean, people were assumed that we are just collecting and, cleaning the environment. They are cleaning, the garbages and filling the bins. So we need to give a proper understanding about what is actually our job about. And whenever I go out with friends, and I mean, my wife is a biologist, so I'm quite lucky. So she understands. We have done loads of field work together. So she understands pretty well what I'm doing. Nice. Sometimes it's difficult to convince her that what I'm doing, because she knows well what's happening. So she could be an advocate. But at the same time, I have been with many friends we have been friends for a decade or so. And I'm surprised that how still they are unfamiliar about the work I'm doing, about the financial aspect, about how we work with communities, because they think that the conservation work is just going out there, making a barbecue and just making a tea in a teapot, like in a bushfire. And then, it's just the fancy thing. What's happening with the financial issues when we have conflict with animals? People are suffering, people are losing animals. And I mean, there are plenty of problems which we need to find a solution. But I think that the first and foremost would be just to let other people what you are doing. So social media would be a great way just to share. I have used the opportunity whenever we have with friends just to not to show off, but just to let them know what we are doing, just to share the experience, some stories about the work, because that is something important. And when it comes to the family, kids, that's more important because they need to, anyway, whenever you are away from your kids, you are sacrificing your personal life for conservation. It happens. Whatever amount of money you are paid, how much promotion you get, you are doing that at the cost of kids, which they are not seeing you. And I think that would be important for them at least to be aware of why they are not seeing you. So, for example, with my son, whenever we go anywhere, when in a trip, having some hiking and nature trekking would be part of the plan, anywhere we go, anywhere in the world, just to see what we are doing, because I want him to know what seems to be a problem in nature and how we can. And obviously, there are some people as conservationists and other people as well who need to take the responsibility and to spearhead the problem, to solve the problem. So I want him to know, and I think that I have been, not successful, but hopefully slightly successful to do that. So that's probably one. And the other one, which I think I wrote about it on LinkedIn, is that how to deal with uncertainty. Obviously, we are living in very uncertain world. So we have two ways. One is to make sure that there's no uncertainty anymore, and it's a very certain and reliable and stable life. So then we need to decide, okay, we want to establish a stable relationship. We want to have family. We want to buy a house. We want to invest. We want to do all this stuff, which they all represent a stability. Or it would be, well, uncertainty would be part of the life, which is my perspective, and you need to do whatever is needed for that stage of life instead of waiting for the certainty to come. So if you think that you need to start a family, just do it, and whenever you feel you need to do that, rather than waiting for another 10 years that to raise enough money to do that. Because I think human adaptation is amazing, because when you commit yourself to something, you plan accordingly, you adapt accordingly. So in that way, you are embracing the uncertainty, converting into some sort of certain and stable condition for your life. And I think that is another thing which we need to really talk about in conservation.
Yeah, that reminds me of the concept of Parkinson's law, which is, work will expand to the time allocated to it. So if you have a deadline, and it's 2 years away to write one paper, you're going to spend that whole 2 years. It's going to take you lots of time. Whereas if we're like, okay, we need to publish it next week, you need that analysis done by tomorrow, it's going to happen, right? So I guess it makes me think of that, if the circumstances force you, to figure out a way to provide for your family, or, if you're saying, okay, I'm going to wait until I'm making X amount as a conservationist, or, until you're 40 as a conservationist to have a family, then you're probably going to wait that long. But if you're like, no, like I want to do it while I'm young and I can actually have the energy to play with my kids, or, have some more years with them when you're older, then yeah, that's some good advice. Cool. Nice.
I think another advice another experience, not really an advice, would be, I think we are a bit obsessed in the way that we shape the community around ourselves. When we mostly talk to conservationists, our friends are conservationists, ecologists, because we are always away. So we basically don't have enough time to establish reliable and long-term relationship with someone beyond conservation, because we are just, some random nomadic people just seeing each other. And I think that is another mistake we make, because if you talk to 10 people, which none of them have ever had any chance of buying a house, how you would be triggered to invest in buying a house to make your life more sustainable? And I think that is more, it's important just to make to diversify the community around yourself and make friendship and establish relationship with people beyond conservation, because other people have done this stuff much sooner than us. And I think if you work with them, not to work with them, just to talk to them, they would somehow, trigger your mind in the way to think about, well, there are other things just to think about, that how leopards are moving, or what is the home range size of a jaguar in Amazon. There are other questions in the world. And I think there are important questions because they are the key thing for our survival. So diversifying the community around ourselves would be another way to address that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for example, if I can share one experience from me, obviously I've been waiting for months to move to Taiwan. I've had lots of time to look on Facebook and find different communities, and obviously I'm hoping to spend some quality time hanging out with my colleagues and getting to know them and learning from them. At the same time, I've found different communities online for fitness, gyms and street workouts. I found a local salsa community near the nearby town, tango dancing. I found some people who surf nearby. And yeah, even on a social aspect as well. Like I think as
Yeah,
a conservationist, some people, obviously everyone, if you have your close friends in your research group, that's great, but I think some people are just prone, like you say, to hang out with only conservationists,
yeah,
when it can be enriching to hang out with other people. And I think one thing this makes me think of, at a conference last year in Oxford on human wildlife conflict, I met a lovely lady from Kenya, and she was saying she used to work in the kind of development sector, and then she moved into conservation from like a more social science background. And she said she'd never met a more egocentric sector than conservation. And I think it's not helped by some people when they say, wow, like, you're doing such meaningful, important work. Thank you for saving the planet. I'm like, I don't need to hear that, right? Because there are other people, I mean, I think everyone should be a conservationist personally. I think it's a mindset, it's the actions you take. Where's your food coming from? How you pay for your energy, how we all live a life. Like everyone has a part to play, like you can't just offload it to some people who are desperately trying to put out camera traps, to monitor cheetah to save the world. That takes everyone. But especially if you're working with these kind of flagship sexy carnivore species like a cheetah or a lion, and you're like the lion world expert or the cheetah person. Obviously, there are different people, there are different cheetah world experts and different, top dogs. But I think people, it seems like a very individualistic sector in the way we kind of lionize individual people, right? But like, oh my goodness, look at that academic. I mean, many of our colleagues, right, are like literal lion world experts. They're great, no shade thrown to them. They're amazing. But we seem to lionize individual people, right? Whether that's head of an organization or an individual academic. Whereas I think I can't imagine it in a kind of charity or social development sector, you know, lionizing a kind of individual person and be like, oh my goodness, they must have all the answers, or they're the person to like kind of bow down to, or anything like
yeah,
that. And I think, and I've heard from other people, in certain organizations they attract big egos, and you kind of have to tiptoe around them, or you kind of you know unknowingly wander into a dogfight between two conservationists who like hate each other and hate each other's guts and are
yeah,
making rival organizations. Or I remember one of our colleagues, Eric, saying tiger conservation is very territorial, right? And
yeah,
in Thailand, they were trying to partner with a different organization who does tiger conservation somewhere else, and they were just laughed at. They're like, oh, we don't want to partner with you, or talking with an Indian researcher when I was thinking about thesis topics, he said, I'd advise not going to research tigers. We could research tigers in India, but you wouldn't be able to be first author because it's like you're not Indian, right? Like you need to be, right? And there's all these things, and it seems quite, yeah. I feel like sometimes our egos can get in the way. We should always trying to squash them. And I think maybe that also, I don't know how it would feed into mental health in a sense, but it also reminds me of there's this saying in Swahili when I was learning Swahili when I went to Kenya last year. There's two words of saying elephant. There's like a Kenyan way, which I think is Ndovu, and Tembo is like a Tanzanian one. But I think the saying, forgive me, I'm probably going to butcher it, it was Wapiganapo Tembo Nyasi Humia, which means like when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. So if you have these two giant, conservation kind of fighting, you know,
yeah,
with their big egos, and you're probably going to get squashed in some way, as one
yeah.
of the kind of lower down people. which I feel like I've experienced and can see how that would happen, as a young conservationist. And you have to tiptoe around different people. So those are my thoughts, really.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, what's your experience of big egos and conservation? Do you have any stories you could tell? You don't have to name specific names. I've kept everyone anonymous.
Yeah, of
Uh,
course, yeah. But it's not about people. Probably if we were in the same position, we would behave the same. I think
mm,
when I first realized about this ego when I moved from medical science to conservation 20
mm,
years ago. And in medical science, we didn't have all these competitions. We didn't have all these, egocentric perspective about each other. I mean, people were sometimes friends, they were unhappy about each other, but there were plenty of opportunities. We had dozens of hospitals that we could just there and learn from day to night and night to day. And you had all those your time, and there were plenty of opportunities just to learn, and you would be paid. That's the thing. So the opportunities were there. There was no competition because there's no shortage of the patients, because everyone could be a patient. There were plenty of hospitals, opportunities, and there are amazing things still to learn and explore. New drugs, new treatment, new mental health issues, everything. And when I moved to conservation, I realized, well, we have quite a few ego people, which basically they are competing over limited resources. So I think that's one of the issues. The resources are quite limited, and we know that the conservation payment is not good, and it goes all the way to the top people as well. So they need to keep everything for their organizations, because that would be about the survival of their organization or their group or their research project or whatever. So they compete, and they affect the decisions. And I think I was in conversation with multiple groups in the UK, and that was amazing. I won't tell you about the exact location of the project. And there were at least 3-4 different groups working for some sort of a government in Asia. And each of them were working on their own data, and they were talking to the government that you need to do this and that. And they were not talking to each other, they're just directly talking to the government. And I told them, well, imagine I am the president of that government. And there are 4 research groups from the West are coming to me and asking, well, you need to do this, you need to do that for development or the highways or for whatever. And at the end, what I would do is just to forget about all of you, because you would say probably not good enough about your colleagues, and you are probably part of your story would be contradicting the other ones. So why should I be considerate about your work? So I think this is something conservation is about making alliances. You need to make an alliance between yourself and then go to the people. What we do is that make an alliance with government, people, not with our colleagues next door. And then that would be a problem, because without creating an alliance, you won't get any really impactful outcome. I think that is happening in many countries. So that's probably one reason about the type of the resources and alliances. These are probably one of the things which I have observed. But I think you're right. I mean, I have seen it very much, especially with big cats. I mean, the big cat. Wow, that's just detrimental. So hopefully I'm not one of them, at least in the leopard
I
or
don't think
cheetah
so.
variety. But I think that is something we have seen it a lot, and yeah. But I think that would be changing, at least from the species-centric perspective, quite soon, because nowadays you won't see people. Many of those species-specific people are about 40, 45 years old. And I think the new generation won't follow the same route, because it's not really about the species anymore. It used to be about the species 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. We were all inspired by Diane Fossey and George Schaller and Jane Goodall, that they're very focused on the species, just work on one species, and we choose one species. And what I think is nowadays mostly about the method, is mostly about the interdisciplinarity, working across the method or learning new tools. So you can apply one day to the seals in Aberdeen, and another day you can use it for penguins in Argentina. So the same, you can use the same, I mean, not really the same, but the same mentality, the same rational thinking. So I think the next generation would be in much better position, because by the time they would be the big guys, probably many of the big names have gone or retired.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess it makes sense in light of what you said about limited resources. Of course, people will fight about that. And in that sense, if you want to keep your project afloat or your research program or whatever, you kind of do have to lionize yourself and be like, look, you need to give me the money because I'm the lion guy, or I'm the world expert on elephants, like you should listen to me. But yeah, like you said, I think yeah, as our problems become bigger in a sense, and
Yeah.
as research has moved along, and also if you're learning, if you're just focused on one species, like you said, there's a time and place for that. But I feel like you're going to have to learn various different things, right? Whereas, say, if I'm just focusing on movement ecology, like you say, you can really develop that technology or your techniques, and it's about the work you're doing every day. Like, what are the skills you're using on a day to day? Is it GIS? Is it movement ecology, R packages? Whatever it is, social science, it's community engagement. You can use that, like you say, in penguins in Antarctica or seals in Aberdeen. So in that sense, it's very applicable. And I think one thing that I like about your research and from taking your class last year was Transboundary Conservation. And I think you said you've been to a couple lectures in the Department of International Relations or something like that. And I think going back to conservation is having friends outside of conservation. I think there are so many fruitful experiences and learning to be had by talking with people from different experiences. Like for example, for me, I had some amazing conversations with some MBA students at Oxford last year, and I was like, we need money in conservation. They've got the business know-how. Why are we not having more partnerships? Or I was talking with a friar, you know, um, at this lunch. I'd never met a friar before, and like a Franciscan monk. And he was like, oh, like, so you're doing wildlife conservation. Do you know about St. Francis? And I was like, no. And he's like, oh, he's the patron saint of wildlife conservation, So I was like, I didn't know that. I was raised Christian, you know. Why didn't all Christians not know about St. Francis, and the importance of, talking about the things he's done in relation to nature conservation. I think that would make many more people care about nature conservation, right? And there's all these things that you wouldn't know unless you spoken to other people from different disciplines. So I think it's really important for sure.
Yeah, I think one way that could help to step away from this egocentric perspective would be, again, to focus on the experience, not on the achievement. Because when you talk about the experience, that would give more inclusivity to people around you, because anyone can have an experience which is obviously invaluable. But if you focus on achievement, obviously that would be just a position for the big guys, the big names, because they have all the money, all the resources, and obviously the passion. I mean, it's not about if you're rich, you would end up successful. You need to have your personal character as well. But if you focus on experiences, then you can give more voices to people around you, give a better shout to everyone, and everyone will be seen. And then we can step away from this, egocentric perspective, because that would be a more diverse and inclusive community of conservationists.
Absolutely. Awesome. So one other thing I'd love to ask you, Mohammed, about PhDs. Obviously, I'm a young conservationist. I'm eyeing up PhDs in the future. And one of our colleagues a few weeks ago said, if you want to avoid a lifetime of poverty and suffering, don't do a PhD, Um, and I think he also mentioned some research, ironically, obviously coming out in a scientific paper, but showing that the pay disparity between, I think, postdocs versus a professor. And a professor, you're doing your research, but you're also teaching and you get paid a lot more. So he's like, if you want to do a PhD, make sure you're doing some teaching afterwards. If you go into academia, if you want to help support yourself. Or another colleague of ours is a consultant who's now doing a PhD at a later age. And she was like, okay, you still do a PhD in whatever you want, make sure it's interesting for you. And if you go into, say, biodiversity consulting later on, you can charge a higher rate because you got a PhD. But I'm wondering, obviously, there are various different jobs if people are interested in getting into conservation. It's not just being an academic, it's not just doing this research. So not everyone needs a PhD. So in what sense, when do you think a PhD is good and necessary? When do you think people kind of don't need it, if they
Yeah.
want to get involved in conservation?
I think the PhD, and to do a PhD is not a general decision to make, is a very personal decision to make. So I can't tell if somebody should do that or not. But I won't regret, I never regret to do a PhD, that I did a PhD, because I was quite keen and passionate from the bottom of my heart to learn something about these animals from the behavioral ecology. So I spent 5 years of my life, spent 3 years just following those leopards in the mountains. but I never regret that one. But if someone else asks me, is it sensible to spend 5 years of our life to do this stuff? I would say, I don't know. You need to decide yourself. So the first thing to do a PhD is not really thinking about raising the income or having a better life. It's about your passion. If you are really keen about exploring and devoting your life for at least 3-4 years to explore quite a few questions, and you think these questions are quite important for you, and it's not only about the question, it's about the way that you can achieve to answer those questions. That's the main thing. And that's about the rational thinking. That's about the critical thinking. And I would say, if you're keen to learn critical thinking and you think that, well, you can, that's something still you think that it's missing from your character, well, let's do a PhD. But if you think that, okay, I want to go into the job business and to the job market and do a business, I would probably say if somebody has done a master in conservation, I would do another master, for example, in economy or MBA or public relations or public policy. So these are probably the stuff that you would find more interesting in terms of combining with your conservation. Because if you think that your role eventually would lie in the impact and having some real world impact in conservation or consultancy or different NGOs, that would ease the way that you can pay for success because you have much more equipped in terms of addressing the issues from multiple perspectives. So that's eventually the decision you need to make. But if you are keen from the bottom of your heart and you are passionate to understand something and you are happy to do that, yeah, why not? So yeah, let's do that. But apart from that, I think another way would be to start a job, start a career, and then see what is missing and then go to the PhD after maybe a gap of 2-3 years. So that could be another thing, just to learn what is the world, how the world is working, and then find the gaps and then go to the PhD. So then
Awesome.
you can use it as a tool to improve your career.
Yeah, awesome. Very insightful. Thank you very much. Cool. I can see we're coming to the end of our podcast now. So just some final questions, I guess, to touch on and pique listeners' curiosity. So we spoke about the plight of cheetahs in Iran. What kind of conservation actions are being taken, would you say? And I was also wondering if we could talk a little bit about cheetah reintroductions and rewilding, as I know that's another interest area of ours.
Yeah. So the cheetahs in Iran has been protected intensively for the past 2.5 decades. So there were plenty of rangers employed, cars has been bought, the vehicles to equip the anti-poaching unit. Thousands of people have been educated, and outreach program have been done. But I think still we are at the position that the cheetahs won't have any chance without any intensive or even invasive interventions. So that's the reality, because it's a small population. They are just interbreeding with each other, and sooner or later, they won't have a chance. Based on the studies from the other, similar species, which the genetic status would be an issue for them. So it needs more. For example, there has been suggestion from a recent paper to do an admixture plan with African cheetahs just to save the cheetahs in a hybrid way, not purity. The way that has been done for the Florida panther or some other species. So that has been suggested by quite a few scholars, or the captive breeding, which obviously didn't go well for the first stage. But yeah, this is a very difficult situation. And when you go to this difficult situation for the species, which are quite charismatic, you need to have very brave managers on top to make very brave decisions, because there would be loads of failures along the way. It won't come very easy. The success is not really achievable without probably some level of failure or trial and error. So that's the situation. But if we just zoom out about the cheetahs and rewilding and reintroduction, honestly, I am quite keen on rewilding of many of these large carnivores. And the reason is that I think our knowledge about how to rehabilitate and rewild many of these large carnivores was quite poor, perhaps 2 decades ago. But thanks to the satellite telemetry and people who have done loads of behavioral ecology and monitoring, post-release monitoring, the success rate is much better now. We have now established population of different cats, and in different parts of the world. In Argentina with the jaguars, we have multiple cheetah population. In Africa, obviously many of them are fenced, which is something we need to overcome in terms of learning how to do it in unfenced areas in more effective way, which is your work, which you have done it very well for your master. And for leopards as well, for leopards and tigers and many of and lynx as well, Iberian lynx or the Eurasian lynx. And I think that's great. That's just the hope that we can do much better. But I should tell you something about what is really the role of many of these big cats. So we may think about, well, these big cats are quite expensive. They need loads of lands. They need, the people would be sometimes unhappy about having them back because the living experience, the experience of living with these cats have been long time gone. For example, with the lynx in the UK, which is more than 1,000 years, which have gone extinct. But I think that is something which I found it back in Iran. And I remember for quite a few reserves where the cheetahs used to be there 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there were plenty of requests from different ministries to establish or construct a road or a highway through that reserve, or to explore iron within those reserves, because many of those cheetah reserves were quite rich in terms of the mineral. And the government was quite successful to stop many of those requests, not because it was the environment was important, because the environment is not important anywhere in most of the world, because of one single species, and that was the cheetah. And the cheetah was quite an icon for that area or for the country, that the government could use it as an excuse to say, well, we know that you want to have a better highway for obviously for the welfare of people, or just to make it shorter when you want to reach your village. But this is the place that we have just the last number of cheetahs, and there's no other place that we can keep them. And in many cases, those requests were vetoed. They were stopped. And now since 3-4 years ago, many of those cheetahs are gone in many of those reserves, now left only in a few. And now I can see that many of those requests have been restored, quite a few successful. In fact, one of the roads which has been long stopped because of the cheetahs is now constructed through the exact place that used to be the cheetahs, one of the routes in their dispersal and movement. Exactly the same place. I actually saw a leopard along that road. I mean, it used to be a trail. Now it's an asphalt road. So what I would say is that sometimes you need to protect these animals, because there's no other currency to protect desert environment, for example, grassland. Nobody would give any consideration, any invaluable, money and resources to protect these steppes and grassland, because everyone thinks about the carbon sequestration, carbon stuff. Where is that? Amazon, Congo, forest. Who thinks about the desert? Nobody. Nobody spend money there because of many of the unrest issues. There are political unrest in many of the desert environment. And I think there are quite a few species which could have that role. And cheetah is one of them. The cheetah is highly invaluable in many parts of Africa, in Asia as well. And if we can have the cheetahs back, I think that it is not about having a cheetah back, and it's not about the survival or viability of the population. It is much bigger picture, and it's about the survival and protection of grasslands, steppes, and deserts, without which we don't have too much resources to protect. So for that reason, I think we need to be careful about if we want to stop many of these cheetah introduction or not, because I'm quite keen to have them back. Obviously, the source, the welfare, the behavioral ecology, human conflict, it's not to say that, well, we need to ignore all of them, yes, but we need to plan. But if we say no cheetah to be back in many parts of the world, well, we are actually ignoring the need for many desert environment that needs some sort of an ambassador, and the cheetah could be that.
Absolutely. Nice, Mohammed. Okay, we have less than a minute left on call. So I'm wondering very quickly, where can people find you if they have any more questions? Where can they follow you online?
Well, the LinkedIn is one place, Twitter, Instagram. So yeah, I'm quite keen on science communication. So I'm quite active in all these platforms.
Nice, cool. Okay, very quickly, if you had a giant message to the world that you could put on a billboard, what would you say? Maybe I should have given you more time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have the privilege of working in conservation because at the end of our life, we can think about we have left an impact on the planet. And that's one
Nice.
of the privileges I think we have.
Lovely. Cool. Mohammed, thank you very much.
No worries. Yeah, that was fun talking to you.
Yeah, lovely. Cool.